Tom had always been careful with money. Working as a computer programmer for the past 8 years, he knew exactly how much he spent on everything. His monthly electricity bill was always between $150 to $180, depending on the season. So when he opened his electric bill in July and saw $412, his heart nearly stopped. He stared at the paper for a full minute, thinking there had to be some mistake. Maybe the electric company had mixed up his bill with someone else's. Tom immediately called the customer service number, waiting on hold for 20 minutes before speaking to a representative. "Sir, I've checked your account 3 times," the lady on the phone told him. "The meter readings are correct. Your usage has more than doubled this month." Tom walked around his house, scratching his head. He hadn't bought any new appliances. His air conditioning was the same old unit he'd been using for 5 years. Nothing had changed in his daily routine. He lived alone in his 2-bedroom house in Willowbrook Gardens, a nice neighborhood with perfectly manicured lawns and strict homeowner association rules. The next month, his bill came in at $398, then $426 the month after that. Tom was losing sleep over this mystery. He'd always prided himself on being smart with technology, but this problem had him completely stumped. "There's got to be something using power that I don't know about," he muttered to himself while pacing around his living room one evening. That's when Tom decided to get serious about solving this puzzle. He ordered a smart home energy monitor online, the kind that tracks exactly where your electricity goes. It cost him $200, but at this point, he was spending an extra $250 every month on electricity bills he couldn't explain. The device arrived 3 days later. Tom spent his entire Saturday afternoon installing it, following YouTube tutorials and reading the instruction manual twice. The system connected to his electrical panel and could track power usage from every outlet and appliance in his house. For the first week, everything looked normal during the day. His refrigerator used the expected amount of power. His computer setup drew about what it should. The air conditioning cycled on and off as usual. But then Tom noticed something strange happening at night. Around midnight, his power usage would suddenly spike. Not just a little increase, but a massive jump that would last for 6 to 8 hours. The monitor showed that whatever was causing this spike was drawing power from his outdoor outlet near the driveway. Tom had installed that outdoor outlet 2 years ago, so he could plug in his lawnmower and leaf blower without running extension cords from inside the house. It was positioned on the side of his garage, close to where his property line met his neighbor's yard. What could be using that much power out there? Tom wondered aloud, staring at the energy monitor's graph on his phone app. The next night, Tom decided to stay awake and catch whatever was causing the power drain. He made a pot of coffee and settled into his living room chair with a clear view of his driveway through the front window. At 11:47 p.m., his phone buzzed, with an alert from the energy monitor. Power usage was starting to climb. Tom quietly opened his front door and stepped onto his porch. Everything looked normal at first. The streetlights cast their usual glow over the neighborhood. Most houses were dark with only a few porch lights still on. Then he heard it, a faint humming sound coming from the direction of his garage. He grabbed a flashlight from his kitchen drawer and carefully walked toward the sound. As he got closer to his outdoor outlet, he could see that something was definitely plugged into it. A thick black cable ran from his outlet across his driveway and disappeared into his neighbor's yard. Tom's neighbor was Janet, a woman in her early 40s who had moved in about a year ago. She drove a shiny white Tesla and seemed to think she was better than everyone else in the neighborhood. She'd been elected president of the homeowner association just 3 months after moving in, which Tom thought was pretty fast for someone so new to the community. Following the cable with his flashlight, Tom could see it snaking through the bushes that separated their properties. The cable was carefully hidden under mulch and decorative rocks. This wasn't some accidental connection. Someone had gone to great lengths to conceal this setup. The cable led directly to Janet's garage, where her Tesla was parked with its charging port open. The car was quietly drawing power from Tom's electrical outlet, charging its battery on his dime. Tom stood there in his pajamas, flashlight in hand, feeling his anger build. He'd been losing sleep for months, worried about his skyrocketing electric bills, and all along his neighbor had been stealing his electricity to charge her expensive car. But Tom was a careful person. He knew he needed proof before confronting anyone about this. The next day, he ordered 2 security cameras with night vision capabilities. If Janet was going to steal his power, he was going to document every single instance. The cameras arrived on a Thursday. Tom spent his lunch break installing them, positioning one to watch his outdoor outlet and another to capture the path the cable took across his yard. Both cameras were motion-activated and would send alerts to his phone whenever they detected movement. That very night, Tom got his first video evidence. The footage showed Janet sneaking across the yard at 12:23 a.m., dressed in dark clothing, and moving carefully to avoid making noise. She unplugged something from Tom's outlet, then connected her charging cable. The timestamp showed she returned at 6:15 a.m. to disconnect everything before Tom would typically wake up for work. Over the next 2 weeks, Tom's cameras captured Janet stealing his electricity 9 different times. She had developed a routine, always coming between midnight and 1 a.m., always being careful to hide the cable, always cleaning up before dawn. Tom calculated the numbers and his stomach turned. Based on his energy monitor data, Janet had been stealing approximately $40 to $50 worth of electricity every week. Over the past 6 months, she had cost him nearly $1,300 in stolen power. The worst part was how calculated it all seemed. Janet hadn't just accidentally used his outlet once or twice. She had planned this whole operation, buying extra-long charging cables, timing her visits to avoid detection, and carefully concealing evidence of her theft. Tom sat in his kitchen one morning, watching the video footage on his laptop while drinking his coffee. Janet appeared on screen, casually stealing his electricity like it was the most normal thing in the world. She even had the nerve to check her phone while waiting for her car to start charging, as if she was just relaxing in her own driveway instead of trespassing on his property to commit theft. Unbelievable, Tom said to his empty kitchen. She's been stealing from me for months and she acts like she owns the place. But the more Tom thought about it, the more he realized this wasn't just about the money, though $1,300 was certainly significant to him. This was about trust, respect, and basic human decency. Janet lived right next door. They were neighbors in a community where people were supposed to look out for each other. Instead, she had been systematically stealing from him while smiling and waving whenever they happened to see each other during the day. She'd even complained to him once about how expensive electricity was getting while secretly using his power to charge her luxury car. Tom knew he had to do something about this situation. He had the evidence, he had documented everything, and he had been patient long enough. It was time to confront Janet about her nighttime activities and demand that she pay him back for all the electricity she had stolen. Little did Tom know that his polite attempt to resolve this matter would lead to a much bigger conflict than he ever imagined. Tom spent 3 sleepless nights planning exactly what he was going to say to Janet. He practiced the conversation in his head while brushing his teeth, rehearsed it during his lunch breaks at work, and even wrote down key points on a notepad. He wanted to handle this situation like a mature adult, give Janet a chance to explain herself, and hopefully resolve everything without involving lawyers or police. On Saturday morning, Tom printed out screenshots from his security cameras showing Janet stealing his electricity. He also prepared a detailed breakdown of his electricity costs, highlighting exactly how much money her theft had cost him over the past 6 months. Armed with his evidence folder, Tom walked across his front yard and knocked on Janet's door. Janet answered wearing a silk bathrobe and holding a cup of expensive-looking coffee. Her perfectly styled hair and manicured nails made it clear she spent considerable money on her appearance. When she saw Tom standing on her doorstep with a folder in his hand, her smile immediately faded. "Tom, what can I do for you this early on a Saturday?" she asked, not inviting him inside. "Hi, Janet. I need to talk to you about something important. It's about my electricity bill and your Tesla," Tom said, trying to keep his voice calm and friendly. Janet's eyes narrowed slightly, but she maintained her composure. "I'm not sure what you mean. Is there some kind of problem?" Tom opened his folder and showed her the first screenshot. The image clearly showed Janet connecting her charging cable to his outdoor outlet at 12:47 a.m. on a Tuesday night. "I've been wondering why my electric bill tripled over the past few months," Tom explained. Then I installed some security cameras and discovered you've been using my electricity to charge your car. Janet looked at the photo for several seconds, and Tom could see her mind working, probably trying to figure out how to respond. Finally, she crossed her arms and lifted her chin. That outlet is practically on the property line, she said with a dismissive wave. I wasn't sure if it belonged to you or if it was community property for everyone to use. Tom couldn't believe what he was hearing. Janet, it's connected to my house. It's fed by my electrical panel. I installed it myself 2 years ago. There's no way you thought it was community property. Well, I didn't know that, Janet replied, though her tone suggested she was just making excuses. These property lines can be confusing, and I'm still relatively new to the neighborhood. Tom showed her more screenshots, including images of her carefully hiding the charging cable under mulch and decorative stones. If you thought it was okay to use, why were you hiding the cable? And why were you only coming at night when you thought I'd be asleep? Janet's expression hardened. I don't appreciate your tone, Tom. And I certainly don't appreciate you spying on me with cameras. That feels very invasive and creepy. Spying on you? Tom's voice rose slightly. Janet, you've been trespassing on my property and stealing my electricity for months. I have every right to put cameras on my own property, to protect it. Alleged stealing, Janet corrected him. You're making some pretty serious accusations here without proof of any intentional wrongdoing. Tom pulled out his calculated breakdown of the stolen electricity costs. According to my energy monitor, you've used approximately $1,300 worth of my electricity over the past 6 months. I'm asking you to reimburse me for that amount, and then we can put this whole thing behind us. Janet laughed, actually laughed, as if Tom had just told her a joke. $1,300? That's ridiculous. Even if I did accidentally use some of your electricity, it couldn't have been more than maybe $50 or $60 total. I have detailed records from my smart energy monitor, Tom insisted, showing her the data charts on his phone. Every time you charged your car, it drew between $40 and $60 worth of power. You did this multiple times per week for months. Those smart monitors aren't reliable, Janet said dismissively. They're notorious for giving false readings. I looked into getting one myself, and the reviews were terrible. Tom felt his frustration growing. Janet wasn't just refusing to take responsibility. She was actively lying and making excuses. Janet, I have video evidence of you stealing my electricity, and I have detailed power consumption data proving exactly how much it cost me. This isn't some minor misunderstanding. Video evidence of me allegedly using an outlet that may or may not belong to you, Janet corrected again, and data from an unreliable device that probably doesn't even work properly. That's when Janet played her trump card. She smiled sweetly and adjusted her bathrobe. You know, Tom, I've been meaning to talk to you about some issues I've noticed around your property. As the homeowner association president, I have a responsibility to make sure everyone follows our community guidelines. Tom's stomach dropped. What do you mean? Well, for instance, those security cameras you just mentioned. Did you get approval from the HOA Architectural Committee before installing them? I don't remember seeing any paperwork about exterior modifications to your property. I didn't know I needed approval for security cameras, Tom said, feeling like the conversation was spinning out of his control. Oh, you definitely do. Any exterior additions or modifications require written approval. That's clearly stated in our HOA covenant that every resident signed when they bought their home. Janet's voice took on an authoritative tone. I've also noticed your trash cans were still visible from the street after 7 p.m. last Tuesday, which violates our aesthetic guidelines. Tom couldn't believe this was happening. Janet, you're changing the subject. We're talking about you stealing my electricity. I'm not changing anything. I'm pointing out that if you want to start making accusations and threats, we should probably make sure your own property is in compliance with community standards first. Janet's smile became even more artificial. I'd hate to have to write you up for multiple violations. Are you threatening me? Tom asked. Not at all. I'm just doing my job as HOA president. It's my responsibility to ensure all residents follow the rules equally. Janet paused dramatically. Although, now that I think about it, maybe we could work something out. If you're really concerned about electricity costs, I'd be happy to have a proper charging station installed somewhere that would be convenient for both of us. It might actually increase property values for the whole neighborhood." Tom stared at her in disbelief. "You want me to install a charging station for you? After you've been stealing my electricity for months?" "I wouldn't call it stealing. More like an innocent misunderstanding between neighbors. But a proper charging station would eliminate any future confusion about property lines or electricity usage." Janet's tone became almost patronizing. "Think of it as an investment in community harmony." "Community harmony?" Tom's voice cracked with incredulity. "Janet, you've been literally stealing from me, and now you're threatening to abuse your HOA position unless I build you a charging station." "I'm not threatening anyone," Janet said calmly. "I'm simply pointing out that good neighbors work together to solve problems instead of making wild accusations and installing spy cameras." Tom realized this conversation was going nowhere. Janet wasn't going to admit wrongdoing. She wasn't going to pay him back. And she was clearly prepared to use her HOA power to retaliate against him for confronting her. "This conversation is over," Tom said, closing his evidence folder. "I gave you a chance to handle this reasonably, but you've made it clear you have no intention of taking responsibility for your actions. I hope you'll reconsider your approach." "Here, Tom," Janet called after him as he walked back toward his house. "Sometimes it's better to focus on building positive relationships with your neighbors instead of looking for problems that don't really exist." Tom didn't respond. He was too angry and too shocked by Janet's brazen attitude. Not only had she refused to acknowledge stealing his electricity, but she'd actually tried to turn the situation around and make him the problem. Worse, she'd basically threatened to abuse her HOA authority to make his life difficult unless he gave in to her demands. As Tom reached his front door, he realized his attempt at diplomatic resolution had completely backfired. Janet wasn't just a thief. She was a manipulative person who was willing to use her position of power to get away with breaking the rules while forcing others to follow them. Tom knew this was far from over. If Janet wanted to play games with HOA violations and power trips, he was going to have to get creative about protecting himself and his property. But first, he needed to document everything that had just happened and start building an even stronger case against his dishonest neighbor. Tom spent the rest of Saturday pacing around his house, replaying the conversation with Janet in his head. Every time he thought about her smug attitude and her threats to abuse her HOA power, his anger flared up again. By Sunday evening, he'd made a decision. If Janet wanted to play games and use her position to bully him, then he was going to use his own skills to level the playing field. As a computer programmer with 8 years of experience, Tom had always been good with technology. But what most people didn't know was that he'd also studied electrical engineering in college before switching to computer science. He understood circuits, voltage, amperage, and electrical systems better than the average person. If Janet was going to keep stealing his electricity, he was going to make sure she regretted it. Monday morning, Tom called in sick to work. He spent the entire day researching smart electrical systems and protective devices online. By the afternoon, he'd ordered several components that would arrive by Friday: a smart circuit breaker system, voltage monitoring equipment, and some specialized electrical components that would help him build the perfect solution to his Janet problem. While waiting for his equipment to arrive, Tom received his first HOA violation notice on Wednesday. The official letterhead made it look very serious, but the content was clearly Janet's petty revenge. According to the notice, his security cameras violated the architectural guidelines because they were installed without prior approval. He had 30 days to remove them or face a $50 fine. Tom almost laughed when he read it. Janet was so predictable. She'd waited exactly 4 days after their confrontation to file the violation, probably thinking that would make it seem less like retaliation. Tom took photos of the violation notice and added it to his growing file of evidence against Janet. Thursday brought another violation notice, this time about his trash cans being visible from the street after the designated time. Tom had checked the HOA rules carefully and he was certain his trash cans had been put away on time. But Janet was clearly just making things up at this point, hoping to harass him into backing down. When Tom's electrical equipment arrived on Friday, he spent the entire weekend studying the installation manuals and planning his system. The smart circuit breaker could monitor electrical flow in real time and be controlled remotely through his smartphone. More importantly, it could detect unusual electrical signatures and respond automatically. Tom's plan was brilliant in its simplicity. He would modify his outdoor outlet so that it would recognize when someone was trying to draw large amounts of power without his permission. When that happened, the system would first send him an alert on his phone. Then, if he chose to activate the protection mode, it would send a controlled electrical surge designed to overload whatever device was stealing his power. The key was making sure the surge would damage the thief's equipment without causing any safety hazards. Tom calculated exactly how much voltage and amperage would be needed to fry a Tesla's charging system without risking fire or injury to anyone. It was a delicate balance, but his engineering background gave him the knowledge to do it safely. Monday evening, Tom began the installation process. He started by upgrading his electrical panel with the smart circuit breaker system. This part was tricky and required him to shut off power to his entire house for several hours, but he managed to complete it without any problems. Next came the outdoor outlet modification. Tom installed a current sensor that could detect when something was drawing more than normal household power levels. He connected this to a relay system that could instantly switch the outlet from normal power to his surge protection circuit. The most challenging part was building the surge generator itself. Tom used a combination of capacitors and transformers to create a device that could deliver a powerful but brief electrical spike. He tested it carefully using old electronics from his garage, making sure it would reliably destroy charging equipment without causing broader damage. By Thursday, Tom's system was fully operational. He'd also upgraded his security camera system with better night vision and motion detection capabilities. Everything was connected to his smartphone, giving him complete control over his properties. Electrical security from anywhere. Tom felt like a kid with a new toy as he tested all the features of his system. The smart circuit breaker showed him real-time power consumption throughout his house. The outdoor outlet sensor could detect when something was plugged in and immediately identify whether it was an authorized device or something suspicious. The surge protection system was armed and ready to activate at the touch of a button on his phone app. But Tom wasn't done yet. He also contacted his homeowner's insurance company to report the ongoing theft and harassment. The insurance agent was very interested in his documentation and told him that what Janet was doing could be considered both theft and trespassing under his policy. They advised him to keep detailed records of everything and assured him that his security measures were completely legal, since they only affected his own property. Tom also researched his state's laws about electrical theft and property protection. He was pleased to discover that homeowners had broad rights to protect their property from theft, including the right to install security devices that would discourage unauthorized use of their electrical systems. As long as he didn't create any safety hazards for people walking by his property, he was well within his legal rights. Friday afternoon brought Tom's third HOA violation notice, this time claiming his lawn was half an inch too tall according to community standards. Tom measured his grass with a ruler and found it was actually shorter than the maximum allowed height. Janet was just making things up now, probably hoping to overwhelm him with paperwork and fees. Instead of getting angry, Tom smiled as he added the bogus violation to his evidence file. Janet's harassment campaign was actually helping his case by showing a clear pattern of retaliation after he'd confronted her about stealing his electricity. That evening, Tom sat in his living room with his laptop, reviewing all the security footage from the past 3 weeks. Janet had continued stealing his electricity regularly, usually every 2 or 3 nights. She'd become even more careful about hiding her activities, sometimes waiting until after 2 a.m. to start charging her Tesla. But Tom's new cameras caught everything in perfect detail. He had hours of footage showing Janet trespassing on his property, stealing his electricity, and carefully concealing evidence of her crimes. Combined with the data from his energy monitoring system, he had an ironclad case against her. More importantly, Tom now had the technical capability to fight back. His surge protection system was ready and waiting for Janet's next theft attempt. All he had to do was wait for her to plug into his outlet. then activate the protection protocol from his phone. Tom went to bed that Friday night feeling more confident than he had in weeks. Janet thought she could bully him with fake HOA violations while continuing to steal his electricity. She was about to learn that her neighbor was much smarter and more resourceful than she'd assumed. The trap was set, the cameras were rolling, and Tom's finger was ready to push the button that would give Janet a very expensive lesson about the consequences of stealing from the wrong person. Tom had been waiting for 3 weeks since installing his smart electrical system. Every night he kept his phone on the nightstand with the volume turned up, ready to receive alerts from his security cameras and power monitoring system. Janet had been stealing his electricity regularly during this time, but Tom wanted to make sure his system was working perfectly before he activated the surge protection. During those 3 weeks, Janet had escalated her HOA harassment campaign. Tom received violation notices about his mailbox being the wrong shade of black, his driveway having oil stains that were barely visible, and even a complaint that his front door wreath was not in compliance with seasonal decoration guidelines. Each bogus violation came with a $50 fine, and Janet seemed to enjoy finding new creative ways to abuse her presidential authority. But Tom stayed patient. He documented every fake violation, added them to his evidence file, and waited for the perfect moment to spring his trap. He knew that Janet's confidence was growing with each successful theft, and overconfident people tend to make mistakes. On Tuesday night, October 15th, Tom's patience finally paid off. He was lying in bed reading a book when his phone buzzed at 2:47 a.m. The motion detector alert showed Janet sneaking across his yard, moving more casually than usual. She'd obviously become comfortable with her routine and wasn't being as careful as she had been in the beginning. Tom quietly got out of bed and watched the live camera feed on his phone. Janet was wearing dark sweatpants and a hoodie, carrying her extra-long charging cable with the confidence of someone who thought she'd never get caught. She walked straight to Tom's outdoor outlet without even looking around to check if anyone was watching. The power monitoring system immediately detected the Tesla's charging signature as Janet plugged in her cable. Tom's phone displayed the electrical load data in real time, showing exactly how much power Janet's car was drawing from his system. According to his calculations, this single charging session would cost him about $43. Tom sat on the edge of his bed, watching Janet walk back to her garage as her Tesla began its charging cycle. She even stopped to check her phone, probably scrolling through social media while stealing his electricity. The casual attitude made Tom's decision easier. He opened his smart circuit app and navigated to the surge protection controls. The system showed him exactly how much power was flowing through his outdoor outlet and confirmed that an unauthorized device was connected. All Tom had to do was tap the red button labeled Activate Protection, and his electrical trap would spring into action. Tom took a deep breath and pressed the button. The surge happened instantly. Tom's electrical system delivered a carefully calculated power spike directly into Janet's charging cable. The surge was designed to overwhelm the Tesla's charging equipment without creating any safety hazards for people or property. Through his security camera, Tom watched as sparks suddenly erupted from Janet's Tesla charging port. The car's lights flickered on and off rapidly, and he could hear the charging system making loud clicking and buzzing sounds even from inside his house. Smoke began rising from the area around the charging port. Within seconds, Janet came running out of her house in her pajamas, obviously awakened by the noise coming from her garage. Tom watched her rush to her Tesla, where she found her charging cable stuck in the port with smoke still rising from the damaged connection. Janet frantically tried to disconnect the charging cable, but the electrical surge had fused some of the internal components. She pulled and twisted the cable, but it wouldn't budge from her car's charging port. The acrid smell of burned electronics filled the air around her garage. Tom's cameras captured everything in perfect detail. Janet's panicked expression, her desperate attempts to remove the damaged charging equipment, and the smoke continuing to rise from her expensive car. The timestamp on the video clearly showed 2:52 a.m., and the infrared cameras provided crystal clear footage despite the darkness. After 10 minutes of struggling with the stuck charging cable, Janet gave up and went back inside her house. Tom could see lights turning on in different rooms as she probably searched for tools or called someone for help, but there wasn't much. She could do at 3 in the morning with a damaged Tesla in her garage. Tom's surge protection system had worked exactly as designed. The electrical spike had traveled through Janet's charging cable and completely fried her Tesla's onboard charging system. The car's battery management computer, charging port controller, and several other expensive electronic components had been overwhelmed by the power surge. 20 minutes later, Tom heard the sound of a tow truck approaching his neighborhood. He watched through his front window as the truck pulled into Janet's driveway. 2 technicians spent nearly an hour trying to disconnect the damaged charging cable before finally giving up and loading the entire Tesla onto their flatbed truck. Janet stood in her driveway in her bathrobe, talking animatedly with the tow truck driver. Even from his window, Tom could see that she was upset and frustrated. She kept pointing in the direction of his house, probably trying to blame him for her car's problems. But the driver just shrugged and finished loading her vehicle. As the tow truck drove away with Janet's Tesla, Tom felt a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. His plan had worked perfectly, but he knew this was just the beginning. Janet would definitely figure out that he was responsible for damaging her car, and she would probably try to retaliate in some way, but Tom was ready for whatever came next. He had months of video evidence showing Janet stealing his electricity. He had detailed power consumption data proving exactly how much money she'd cost him. He had documentation of her retaliatory HOA harassment campaign. And now he had perfect footage of his electrical protection system defending his property from theft. The next morning, Tom woke up feeling more energetic than he had in months. He made himself a large breakfast and sat at his kitchen table, reviewing the previous night's camera footage on his laptop. The video quality was excellent, and every detail of Janet's failed theft attempt was clearly visible. Around 9 a.m., Tom's doorbell rang. He looked through his front window and saw Janet standing on his porch, still wearing her bathrobe, but now looking angry instead of panicked. Her hair was messy and she had dark circles under her eyes, suggesting she hadn't slept much after the Tesla incident. Tom opened his door with an innocent smile. "Good morning, Janet. You're up early for a Wednesday." "You know exactly why I'm here," Janet said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "What did you do to my car last night?" "Your car?" Tom replied, maintaining his innocent expression. "I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about. I was asleep all night." "Don't play games with me, Tom. My Tesla was damaged while it was parked in my garage, and I know you had something to do with it." Tom shrugged casually. "That sounds terrible, Janet. Have you considered calling your insurance company? Sometimes electrical problems just happen with these high-tech cars." Janet's face turned red with frustration. She clearly knew that Tom was responsible for her car's damage, but she couldn't prove it without admitting that she'd been stealing his electricity. She was trapped between wanting to accuse him and needing to hide her own criminal behavior. "This isn't over, Tom," Janet said through gritted teeth. "I don't know exactly what you did, but I'm going to find out. And when I do, you're going to pay for every penny of damage to my car." Tom's smile widened slightly. "Janet, I have no idea what you're talking about, but if you're having problems with your car, maybe you should be more careful about where you plug it in to charge." The implication was clear, and Janet's eyes widened as she realized that Tom knew about her electricity theft. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Janet turned and walked back to her house without another word. Tom closed his door and leaned against it, feeling completely vindicated. His trap had worked perfectly. Janet's theft had finally cost her something significant, and now she knew that he was aware of her criminal behavior. The balance of power in their conflict had shifted dramatically overnight, but Tom also knew that Janet wouldn't give up easily. She was probably already planning her next move, and he needed to be ready for whatever retaliation she might attempt. Fortunately, he had his cameras, his evidence, and his technical skills to protect himself from whatever Janet tried next. Tom spent the rest of Wednesday organizing all his evidence into a comprehensive file. He had months of security footage showing Janet stealing his electricity, detailed power consumption data proving the financial impact, and now crystal clear video of his electrical protection system defending his property. He also included all the bogus HOA violation notices Janet had sent him in retaliation. Thursday morning brought an expected development. Tom found a certified letter in his mailbox from Janet's attorney, demanding that he pay $3,500 for repairs to her Tesla. The letter claimed that Tom had maliciously damaged her vehicle and threatened legal action if he didn't pay within 10 days. Tom couldn't help but laugh as he read the letter. Janet's lawyer had clearly written it without knowing the full story. The letter made no mention of electricity theft or trespassing, which meant Janet had obviously lied to her attorney about what really happened. Instead of feeling worried, Tom felt energized. Janet's decision to involve lawyers meant it was time for him to stop playing defense and go on the offensive. He spent Thursday afternoon consulting with his own attorney, a sharp woman who specialized in property disputes and criminal law. When Tom showed his lawyer the evidence file, her eyes lit up with interest. "This is one of the clearest cases of utility theft I've seen in years," she told him. "Your neighbor has been committing a crime every single time she plugged into your outlet." Tom's lawyer explained that utility theft was a serious offense in their state. Stealing more than $500 worth of electricity was classified as a felony, and Janet had clearly crossed that threshold months ago. The lawyer also pointed out that Janet's retaliatory HOA violations could constitute harassment and abuse of authority. "Here's what we're going to do," the lawyer said with a confident smile. "We're going to file a police report about the utility theft, and then we're going to let Janet dig herself into a deeper hole." Friday morning, Tom met with Detective Rodriguez at the local police station. The detective was initially skeptical about the electricity theft complaint, but his attitude changed completely when Tom showed him the security footage and power consumption data. "This is actually pretty common," Detective Rodriguez explained. "We see a lot of cases where people steal electricity from their neighbors, especially for charging electric cars. The difference is that most people don't have this level of documentation." The detective was particularly impressed with Tom's smart electrical system and the detailed records it had generated. "Your evidence is so thorough that this case will be easy to prosecute," he said. "We'll start with utility theft charges, and depending on how much money was involved, it could be elevated to a felony." While the police were investigating Janet's theft, Tom decided to address her abuse of HOA authority. He researched the homeowner association's governing documents and discovered that board members could be removed for misconduct. More importantly, the HOA could be held legally liable if board members used their positions to harass residents. Tom drafted a formal complaint to the HOA Board of Directors, detailing Janet's retaliatory violations and her abuse of presidential authority. He included copies of all the bogus violation notices, along with timestamps showing they were issued immediately after he confronted her about the electricity theft. Monday morning brought the confrontation Tom had been expecting. Janet pounded on his front door at 7:30 a.m., clearly agitated and probably having not slept well over the weekend. "Tom, we need to talk right now," Janet demanded when he opened the door. She was still in her pajamas and her hair looked like she'd been pulling at it with stress. "Good morning, Janet. What can I do for you?" Tom replied calmly, though he made sure to keep his phone recording app ready in case she said anything incriminating. "You know exactly what this is about. The police called me yesterday asking questions about your electricity in my car. What did you tell them?" Tom smiled innocently. "I just reported some criminal activity that's been happening on my property. I figured the police should know about it." "Criminal activity?" Janet's voice cracked with anger and panic. "I never committed any crimes. That outlet was confusing and I made an honest mistake about the property lines." "Janet, I have months of video footage showing you sneaking onto my property at night, stealing my electricity and carefully hiding the evidence. That doesn't look like an honest mistake to me." Janet's face went pale as she realized the implications. "You can't prove I intended to steal anything. And even if I accidentally used some of your electricity, that doesn't give you the right to damage my car." "Actually, it does," Tom replied confidently. "Property owners have the right to protect their property from theft. My electrical protection system only activates when someone tries to steal power without permission." "This is ridiculous," Janet said, but her voice had lost its angry edge and now sounded more desperate. "We're neighbors. We should be able to work this out between ourselves without involving lawyers and police." Tom almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I tried to work it out between us, remember? You refused to take responsibility, threatened me with bogus HOA violations, and then demanded that I build you a charging station. You made this mess, Janet, not me. That afternoon, Detective Rodriguez called Tom with an update. We've calculated the total amount of electricity your neighbor stole, and it comes to over $1,600. That makes this a Class D felony in our state. The detective explained that Janet would be arrested within the next few days, once the district attorney reviewed the case and issued a warrant. Your documentation made this investigation incredibly easy, he said. We rarely see cases with this much clear evidence. Tuesday evening, Tom was cooking dinner when he heard sirens in his neighborhood. He looked out his front window and saw 2 police cars parked in Janet's driveway, their red and blue lights flashing in the gathering darkness. Tom watched from his window as Detective Rodriguez and another officer knocked on Janet's door. When, she answered. They had a brief conversation before placing her in handcuffs. Several neighbors had come out of their houses to see what was happening, and Tom could see them whispering to each other as Janet was loaded into the back of a police car. The arrest was particularly embarrassing because it happened right at dinner time when most families were home. Janet's teenage daughter came running out of the house crying, begging the officers not to take her mother. The scene created quite a spectacle in their usually quiet neighborhood. Wednesday morning, the local newspaper ran a story about Janet's arrest under the headline, HOA President Charged with Felony Utility Theft. The article described how she had systematically stolen electricity from her neighbor for months to charge her Tesla, resulting in over $1,600 in theft. The newspaper story triggered a flood of calls to the HOA board from other residents who had experienced problems with Janet's leadership. Several neighbors came forward with their own stories of retaliatory violations and harassment campaigns. One resident had been fined repeatedly for having the wrong type of flowers in their front yard, after disagreeing with Janet about a budget issue. By Friday, the HOA board had scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss Janet's removal from office. Tom received a formal apology letter from the board, acknowledging that the violation notices he'd received were inappropriate and retracting all associated fines. The legal process moved quickly after Janet's arrest. Faced with overwhelming video evidence and detailed financial records, Janet's attorney advised her to accept a plea bargain rather than risk a trial. She ultimately pleaded guilty to felony, utility theft, and agreed to pay Tom full restitution plus legal expenses. Janet's punishment included 18 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, and $2,400 in restitution to Tom. She was also required to attend classes on property rights and community responsibility. The felony conviction meant she was automatically removed from the HOA board and banned from holding any community leadership positions in the future. The repair costs for Janet's Tesla ended up being even higher than she'd initially claimed. The electrical surge had damaged not just the charging system, but also the car's main computer and several safety systems. Her total repair bill came to over $4,000, none of which was covered by insurance since the damage resulted from her own criminal activity. Within 6 months, Janet had put her house up for sale. The combination of legal expenses, repair costs, and social embarrassment made it impossible for her to stay in the neighborhood. Tom heard through other neighbors that she'd moved to an apartment across town and was driving an old Honda while saving money to replace her damaged Tesla. Tom, meanwhile, became something of a neighborhood hero. Other residents sought his advice about dealing with HOA problems and property disputes. His story spread throughout the community as an example of how documentation, patience, and smart technology could overcome bullying and abuse of authority. The HOA board eventually elected Tom to serve as the new president, a position he accepted with the promise to run the organization transparently and fairly. His first act was implementing new policies, requiring board members to recuse themselves from any matters.